Hi, everybody. Dr. Kaziesko here. Thanks so much for joining in this week. Today's topic is going to be about the most common developmental trauma diseases. Sorry, give me one second. I'm just going to adjust my lighting here. Um, so, a lot of people who are suffering, you'll laugh if you've seen my other videos where I take my glasses off because I try and adjust my lighting here. Um, so a lot of diseases that are really common throughout the world and the United States um, are it's not talked about how much um, high A scores and developmental trauma translates into adult health later in life. It's funny because um, there's a lot of mention in these statistics of, how mistreatment, whether it be from high childhood ACE scores, which are adverse childhood experiences from abuse in the home, or they're from there's four different types of abuse. There's a trigger warning also for this video. If anybody has had a history of abuse, please use caution going forward in the video because I will be mentioning specific types and statistics. So we're talking about people who, as children, experienced physical, sexual, mental, or abuse or neglect. This can also be somebody who was either in a war zone of some sort, grew up in a war zone, grew up in a trafficking situation, or even somebody who had a lot of consistent traumas in their home environment of like their physical home. So they had a lot of natural disasters, something to that effect where there was developmental, like chronic developmental traumatic experiences for a child. So it's important to understand, and I really wanted to drive a statistics home that is very underlooked. Um, the statistics of how many people estimated children are abused to the statistics of adults with depression. Okay, so the most common diseases are that come from developmental trauma are depression, autoimmune diseases, hypertension is very big, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, cancer. It's interesting because these are also some of the top, um, these are some of the top natural killers of our country as well. Like heart disease is the leading cause. So, from statistics that I have gotten from um, the World Health Organization and some other organizations for their factual statistics out, the rate of children who are abused is estimated to be about 300 million. Um, they're saying even up towards every 3 to 4 children, which is really sad. And then also the rates of depression are about 300 million in adults. So I find it very interesting, when we're looking at if you are somebody who's been struggling with depression and stress and things like that, um, this isn't really something that's very screened for right now. So I just kind of wanted to throw this out there so you can screen for it yourself and you can start to get your health back on track. Okay, if it's ever been on track. So, people with developmental trauma also, some of them don't realize they have trauma until later in life because it was so normalized. So again, those traumas could be anything from growing up in a specific war zone. The type of trauma that I think goes very much under the radar is, types of emotional abuse, psychological abuse, where there's no scars, there's no anything. It's just like this chronic toxic stress type of syndrome where your fight or flight is going off all the time. Um, and so it's important to understand that during developmental trauma, um, that has an absolute effect on the brain and the way the brain develops. So essentially, we're talking about being in a chronic state of stress. Parts of your brain are underdeveloping. So in depression, it's very common to have shrinkage of the prefrontal lobe of the brain. That's very common. Um, Also, an overactivation of parts of the brain that have uh, more memory and trigger like emotional regulation. Some of them are shrank, some of them are enlarged. So, the amygdala, you might have an enhanced stress response. So, because of that, the way that you're developing, you may have a harder time or develop disease early because your body is consistently increasing your heart rate, increasing your blood pressure, increasing stress hormones, things like that. So your body is consistently in like this stressed state. So that's really important. That's really important to understand because there's so many people I think out there that, might have had these types of experiences, but they kind of were like, well, I don't know if that's me or not. Like, that's not me. I was really, everything was pretty good here. But yet, like, understanding the backbone of what trauma really means and then what developmental um, trauma looks like, and understanding that to the individual, it may look different than people out on the outside. So it doesn't always have to look like, bumps and bruises or severe things. It can be things that have gone under the radar for a long time. So that's important to understand. And really, what I want to drive home is more hope for survivors for their health because a lot of statistics out there can be overwhelming and scary. There could be a feeling of dread like, hey, okay, great. I have developmental trauma. That's me. I have more of a risk of heart disease and things like that. So here is the most amazing news, okay? So our bodies are truly driven to heal. They are not meant to be in a state of fight or flight all the time. So our natural state of being is a lot more in a peaceful, joyous. That's when we're like most in our self energy. Peaceful, joyous, calm. That's when our prefrontal cortex is working the best. We're able to make decisions. We're able to, our mood is better. We have higher cognitive function, things like that. Our memory is better. So it's important to understand that what may have been for long can be changed. And most of chronic disease takes a long, long time to develop, sometimes 20 to 40 years. So it's really important to understand that there are ways to backpedal from that, even if the disease process has begun. And the wonderful part about that is you can do that through what's called epigenetics. So, epigenetics is that we all have a genetic code. Okay. A lot of people think that, like, well, my mom, my dad, my so and so died of heart disease. I'm going to die of heart disease. My so and so had depression. I'm going to have depression, you know, uh, diabetes, whatever it may be. So our genes, we may be more susceptible to disease, but our environment, lifestyle, um, and our habits are really, and basically our day-to-day lives are really what determine us turning on or off those genes, right? So we can actually have the power within us to actually turn off disease genes. Okay. And that's so powerful to know because that helps us to understand that we have so much power within our own bodies to do our own healing. We don't have to look towards medications and chronic supplements and things like that. We can change our state of being. We can choose to be on a healthy path. And that is absolutely not, by the way, to invalidate or say just be positive. It's really to give you a message more of hope that your body is so resilient and that there is absolute healing that can take place um, if you decide and take a stand for yourself. Okay, especially as like a developmental, if you were say somebody who was an abuse survivor, sometimes it's hard to realize that, like, in order to get your life in order or get better, you kind of have to be the one to be your own hero. You got to be your own hero. And you can do that with mental health, you can do that with physical health, you can do that with emotional health, whatever it may be. But my advice to you today is to um regain hope. Regain hope, because we have a lot more in our power than we think we do. Okay, as the human race. Okay, so if you are one of those statistics as a child, and you had high A scores, um I want you guys to understand that there's absolute hope. And so your emotional state of being drives some of the disease. So it's very important to not necessarily shame yourself for what you've been through, or kind of sometimes you can have like these shame attacks, shame cycles. You shame yourself for shaming yourself, kind of, ironically. Or it can feel like embarrassing. um but it that really can drive, like, shame is one of the lowest vibrations you can feel. Okay, so it's not necessary for you to get out of a disease state to be like hyper positive. I do think there's a thing called toxic positivity where it's really interesting that, like, this is really big with, you'll see some spiritual healers or things like that, like, being positive is the only way. Yes, of course, positivity and hope helps. Of course, that helps. But when it's used in a way that almost throws like a shame blanket over the rest of your emotions and emotional states, and invalidates them and almost shames you for having a bad emotional reaction, a bad emotional state, or whatever. You might feel angry, you might feel sad, you might feel depressed. Um, Toxic positivity will throw almost a shame blanket over anything else that's not, like, just think positive, just let it go. This, like, if you don't really, and that can actually be a sign of emotional abuse, believe it or not. And kind of just toxic behavior is that anybody who invalidates an emotional experience for you is kind of, especially with toxic positivity, because that goes such under the wire that it throws a blanket over your actual experience and how to help yourself emotionally. So if you're having a poor experience, what helps the most is to honor that experience. So honor what you're going through, honor the emotional state that you're in, and work through those emotions so you can let go of things, right? Don't get stuck in those states. That's the unhealthy part, is where you get stuck in a state of, and this is really common for survivors. They get stuck in states of shame, of depression, of helplessness, things like that. Those are very low vibrational states. And so when we get stuck there, it kind of, that's where the shame cycles happen, right? So it's important, if you're stuck in that state, I'm going to give you a couple little tips to kind of raise your vibration up. First of all, anybody who's throwing toxic positivity at you, thank them, put up a boundary, okay? Because that it is more healthy for you to be away from that versus hearing that and then feeling bad about yourself for not being more positive or feeling depressed, okay? Um, so things that you can do, things that are higher on the emotional vibration scale. Anger is actually higher on the emotional scale than depression and shame and hopelessness or helplessness, right? So if you even had something that made you feel angry, or like you journaled out something and something made you feel angry, that's actually raising your vibrational state a little bit, and that's an empowering emotion. Feeling anger, that's really, really powerful. That's like a let go, and move forward. Anger really helps to move forward. So if you're not like super positive and you're super angry, that's okay. Okay. So as long as you're not taking it out of other people, um, the so those it's raising your vibration state even with that. And it's okay to move up and down that scale. You just don't want to get stuck. Okay, because that's where the spirals happen. I truly believe that rates of suicide, things like that, end up happen when people get stuck, especially if you're having an emotional flashback or something. You get stuck in this state. And so what that can do when you get out of those states and you try and get something that um, changes your vibration a little bit, it can change your emotional state and bring you forward a little bit into more action that's helpful for yourself. So if you find yourself stuck in that lower vibration state, things like essential oils are really great. They get their senses going, they activate different parts of the brain. Essential oils are very calming. That can be a great way to lift your vibration a little bit. Things like being out in nature. So grounding is so healthy for you. Being out in nature, going towards waterfalls, ocean, putting your feet in the grass, the sand, getting out in the sun, just the ultraviolet light. In the past, when we could do a lot more things, I would say like even for people who this isn't like the healthiest thing, but people who couldn't get outside in the daylight in the winter, I would be like, okay, every like 2 weeks or something, spend 5 minutes in a tanning booth. It doesn't have to be like, I'm not condoning tanning booths, but for a depression effect, there's multitudes of different things. There's different lighting you can have in your home that helps with this too. But just like the fact that you're getting in warmth, getting the UV rays can help with the emotional lift. Okay. So that's a good way to help getting outside, getting out in the sun. Exercise is an amazing way to lift your vibrations. Not only that, but all the health effects that you might be having. So if you have heart disease, if you have depression, exercise helps with depression. Exercise helps with heart disease. Exercise helps with hypertension. Exercise helps with an enormous amount of diseases. Okay, exercise helps relieve stress. And it doesn't have to be anything when people are exercising, especially people with things like chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, because I know that's very common also in abuse survivors. um, it doesn't have to be a lot of things that stop people from going forward or moving forward is they have this expectation of what the event should be. So if you were like exercising at an hour a day like 10 years ago and you set that expectation for yourself now, the thought of getting out there and doing what you were doing 10 years ago is going to like basically crush what you want to do for yourself in the time being. So, you know what I'm saying? So it's like don't set your expectation to such a limit that you feel anxious going into it. Okay? So this could be literally like a 10 to 15-minute walk. Okay? This could start out which for somebody who has severe depression or disease or heart disease, has difficulty breathing. Um, this could be as easy to I'm going to take a walk to my mailbox and around the perimeter of my property. If I still feel good, I'm going to go to the end of the street. If I still feel good, I'm going to go 2 more blocks. So see how it's like setting small um, intervals for yourself can be really powerful. It doesn't have to be a gangbusters thing where you go in and go crazy with it, right? Um, so another thing that you can do with my time's almost up here. Um, Another thing that you can do, just wanted to mention a couple more things to get out of this state of chronic disease. Um, Doing things during the day that are helpful or enjoyable to you, things that bring you joy. So, specific songs, taking a 10-minute break to watch your favorite Netflix. This is not, you're not like sitting there binge watching Netflix for hours or anything. This is just like, watch your favorite comedy for a little while, you know? Um, Things like that can be really helpful, especially laughing. Um, I'm not a big proponent of watching a ton of television, but I am a big proponent of living life. and keeping yourself healthy, and things like laughing or calling a friend, things like that, that can absolutely help. That can absolutely help. Sometimes the solitude, especially with everything that's going on right now, the solitude can be crushing. So getting out there, having a laugh, do something fun or silly, or laugh at yourself, whatever, laugh with your kids if you have kids. um that can really help to raise your vibration and reduce stress. So stress is such a big part of trauma, right? Because you're constantly having that loop of easily, especially with developmental trauma, because your brain was wired to protect yourself. It was meant to protect. You were wired to protect yourself versus thrive, right? So that's the main differences. And so people who are going into their medical doctor and they might be saying, "Do you have depression?" They're doing a depression screening. Um, Please consider, and antidepressants are not the going on an antidepressant doesn't mean you failed, by the way. Okay. Um, Going on an antidepressant and not doing anything else for yourself and using that as a crutch, I feel like is a disservice to the person and a human, because the underlying root cause of the disease, one of them is the trauma. And then the secondary effects of things that create depression, um, if you do have depression, you have usually a poorer diet. You might have addiction, things like that. So you're getting poor nutrient malabsorption. You're not detoxifying as well. Your gut health might suffer. So you're having a parlay of health effects going on. It's not just one root. Usually, there's multiple roots towards chronic disease. Okay. um and it's important to understand that. And chronic disease, it shouldn't, the answer, in my opinion, my medical opinion, is not to put somebody on medication for life. It's to really understand the root cause so that the person can thrive in their life, and start to reverse some of these things. So I hope you found that helpful today. I dove in a little bit more than I usually do, but um, anybody who would like to see other videos or different topics, please let me know. I try and aim my videos towards topics that are important to people who have chronic stress and developmental trauma or other types of trauma, and reversing the health effects of that. Most of these people have, again, depression, heart disease, they have chronic fatigue, they have fibromyalgia, they have adrenal issues. So those are the topics that I feel are most important. And it's important to know, especially autoimmune diseases too. Autoimmune diseases. Um, Autoimmune disease, I want to touch on this really quickly. Autoimmune diseases, what that means is, or some examples. Let me throw out some examples for you. So, an autoimmune disease is actually type 1 diabetes, things like lupus, um, multiple sclerosis, celiac disease, Hashimoto's, Graves' disease. So, they're basically diseases that attack the body. Your body is signaled to develop immune cells to attack its own tissue. Okay. And whether or not that's the whole body, whether that's a specific tissue, is kind of dependent on what type of disease it is. So I firmly believe that the autoimmunity aspect of being triggered and being set off is some of the, um, to be honest, and there's research behind this, is feelings of self-hatred, um, and also like kind of self-attacks, you know, that may have been instilled by through environment. Um, I can actually give you some research on that if you're more interested in that. But um, that is, autoimmunity can wreak havoc on your body. So autoimmunity, typically, you don't necessarily can get rid of the disease. You turn the disease off. You stop what's causing the disease to continually perpetuate and get worse, and the inflammation getting worse. You put it in remission, and quiet the body. So that's important because if you're chronically in a state of stress and you have an addiction of some sort, or you are eating unhealthy and you're depressed and you might not be able to cook your own meals or whatever, and you're going out to out to eat or whatever, those things add up. They really do. They really do. Day in, day out. Um, the damage that causes to our bodies is immense, for anybody, not just survivors, but those are the most common things for survivors. So I hope you guys found that helpful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, and share the video or comment below and let me know how I can help you the best. Okay. Have a great week, and I'll see you guys next week.